I'm Jennifer Walker Gates with Walker Gates Bella in Austin, Texas. I'm here in this video today with my colleague, Diego Nuñez, who is an associate attorney in our firm. Hey, Diego.
Hey, Jennifer.
And we're here today to talk about how to prepare for a USCIS interview with your spouse. Diego and I have accompanied many couples to their USCIS interviews and want to share with all of you out there who are going through the immigration process with a spouse some of the most important tips and tricks that we have learned through our experience representing couples at interviews. And so hopefully this will help all of y'all out there, avoid getting into a situation where, your case has become suddenly much more complicated than it should have. So first, we're going to talk about what to kind of expect in a case where there aren't any kind of like red flags. Then second, we'll talk about what red flags are for USCIS purposes anyway. What are the kind of things that may trigger them to suspect that a marriage isn't valid or legitimate? And then third, what to expect in those situations when you go to an interview and you have a potentially complicated marriage situation, and what to expect if they separate you at your interview. So Diego, let's start with the basics. Tell me a little bit about, when do couples have to go for interviews at USCIS?
Well, so most couples are going to be interviewed for their permanent resident application when it's based on marriage. Once in a while, if someone has done a fiancé visa and they file everything and there's no question that the relationship is legitimate, you might get a case where it will be approved without even having to go to an interview. But let's say that it's just a marriage, it's a application based on marriage, and you're filing it with the Immigration Service here in the United States. So all those cases are going to get interviewed, and depending on the kind of case that it is, you can expect different things from the interview. And so, like as you mentioned, there's the cases with no red flags, and then there's the more complicated cases. And what I would call the clean-cut cases might be the one where the couple has lots of evidence of their relationship as being, a valid marriage. Children are the best evidence, obviously, because you've got, the combination of DNA, and it's irrefutable if you've got 3 kids and taxes and combined income. But then also you have some of the complicated cases that can be complicated by many different factors. And so that could be maybe the individual has many different marriages and several applications for permanent residency. Or maybe they have a complicated criminal history, or they've been placed in deportation proceedings. So
let's just back up for a second. It
Sure.
just occurred to me that it might be helpful for us to explain kind of what is the deal with USCIS looking at marriages in the first place? What are they looking for? If they're why do they care if I've been married 5 times before or not? What is their deal when it comes to marriage?
Well, now some people may have been married many different times and it won't really be an issue. However, let's say that if an individual has been married multiple times and on multiple occasions has tried to obtain permanent residency, well, that's when immigration might get a little suspicious about the intent of the individual in that marriage. So
what is it that they want people, when they file a marriage-based case for an immigrant for potential, they want to bring a spouse, for example, they want everyone to prove that it's not a marriage for immigration purposes, right?
Right.
They expect everyone to prove that this is a love relationship or at least that this is not solely for purposes of getting a green card.
That's right. You want to be able to show that it's a good faith marriage. And so, and one of the things that I always remind clients is that it doesn't have to be a perfect marriage. It just has to be real. And so, for an individual that is married to someone just to get an immigration benefit, well, there's a lot of things that go along with it. Maybe they're not living together. They don't know much about their spouse's family or that kind of history. And immigration will go into those details during the interview by asking questions. And the interviewers can be, not always, but often can be very skilled in how they get that information. The interview starts as soon as you're called in, even before they swear you in. And they start, I think, the good ones start taking notes about everything that you say, even before you sit down. And so it's important to be able to, prove, the validity of that marriage. And it's not just the interview and it's not just your answers, it's also the evidence that you're providing. So some of that independent evidence.
So what are the kinds of things that might trigger USCIS? What are the red flags, as you say? What are the things that might trigger them to be suspicious that this is a marriage for immigration purposes?
Well, by regulation or by statute, when you are in deportation proceedings, you are automatically suspected that marriage is, suspected that there might not be a good faith marriage. And so you have to go in and prove that to the immigration officer.
If you get married after removal proceedings are initiated, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, so that can be one red flag. Other red flags sometimes occur because maybe a prior spouse has actually alleged that their marriage was not valid, and then you're going into another, you're already in another marriage and you're going to be interviewed, and that prior marriage might come and affect your current marriage and your ability to get status through that marriage. And then again, there's the things that can be red flags, like when there are very large age differences, inability to really communicate. So maybe one client speaks French and the other one does, only speaks English, and very little common ground in the ability to communicate. And then, I've seen this happen, and it goes both ways, where the individual is married and has a child outside of that marriage. And so then that can make it go in, can make immigration question that relationship. But again, because a marriage is not always perfect, but it just has to be valid. And so having an extramarital affair does not invalidate that marriage.
What is the standard, Diego? Like, how much do I have to prove that this is a good faith marriage? If, let's say, there are some flaws, there are some imperfections in my relationship, according to USCIS, like, I've had situations where people were not living in the same household because maybe one spouse was having to care for an ill parent, or one spouse was in school and the other one had a job in a different location or something like that. So, that's a pretty big red flag for USCIS when the spouses are not living in the same household. How much evidence do I have to provide on the other side? Like, what level do I have to get to prove that this is actually a good faith marriage?
Well, so you don't have to prove the relationship is bona fide, with beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't have a standard that is that high, but the evidence has to show, it has to, be more probable than not that it's valid. Yeah. And so to give you like to quantify the amount of evidence that you need to provide is difficult, because, just because you can have many different forms of evidence to show that the relationship is legit. So let's say that that it's a marriage without children, but both clients are able to provide their passports or travel history, and you see that they've traveled to Paris, New York, London, Las Vegas, lots of travel together. You have pictures with, family members, and you have affidavits from your in-laws. Combined assets is huge, so, I mean, some people stay together just because their assets are so intermixed that they don't want to deal with the headache of divorcing because of what it can entail. So having financial interests, whether it's investments or debt, a mortgage, those are that's good evidence that the marriage is legit.
So what can people expect at the interview if they have what you were saying, let's going back to the beginning where you were saying like a clean cut case, where maybe it's like pretty clear, like they have kids, they live together, their assets are joined, they have common bank accounts, they have common tax returns, and there aren't any real of the red flags that we might see. What kind of interview experience would they expect to have?
Well, those cases can go actually, if you've got a well-seasoned officer, that might get adjudicated in 15, 20 minutes, in and out. Often they might skip the majority of the questions. Maybe they'll go into the security related questions because they have no doubt about the marriage being legitimate. Mm-hmm. And, so usually an officer is going to go into the petition by the spouse and approve that before they go into the permanent resident application. And sometimes they might just have a question or two to complete that form, the review of that form, and then they'll go into the other aspects of the application of residency. Again, security, criminal related issues, and things like that, that don't have much to do with the marriage. And I've had officers where they really would ask maybe about, I don't know, maybe not even 5 minutes worth of questions. And then the rest is just processing the paperwork and you're out of there. And in those kinds of cases, what you want to do is just make sure that you don't delay your case. So you want to go there prepared with the certified copies or the original copies of certificates of the marriage certificate, maybe the divorce decrees from prior marriages, documents of identity that are valid, proof of your income, that kind of stuff, so that it is just an easy breezy in and out type of interview.
Yeah. And then what about, in cases where there are potential red flags, and those can vary. There are a whole lot of those, but let's say, a couple goes to their interview and they have, it's a situation where there's a large age difference, let's say, between them.
Yeah. So I've had a few of those incidents, and the often what happens, and it again, well, I want to say it doesn't happen that often, but it can. And so when it does happen, usually the officer is going to take the immigrant first into the interview, and you're going to be separated. Usually one officer is going to interview both people. And the last time it happened, he interviewed the immigrant husband, and then he called in the wife to be interviewed, and he just asked the husband not to say anything during the questioning of his wife. And it was a big age difference. It was over, I think, 24 years or so, but they had been together for many, many years. And so they knew each other very well, and it wasn't an issue. And one of the things that the officer asked the client to do was to draw a diagram of their bedroom. So he asked where the closets were, where the dressers. He even asked how many pillows they slept with, and in that situation, my client's wife had just had surgery on her leg. And so she was using 4 pillows to prop up her leg and 2 on her head. And so he just had 2, thinking just the head. And then, she said 6. When the officer asked, well, what's going on? I mean, it was, even though the answer was different, he didn't have an issue with it because, he could see that my client's wife had a cast and she was on a wheelchair, and he understood, okay, 4 pillows for your leg, 2 for your head. Another question that he asked was if my client gave anything to his wife for their anniversary, and he said he gave her flowers. And when she was asked if she received any kind of present for her anniversary, she said no. And he said, well, what about the flowers? And her response was, flowers aren't a present, they're just flowers. So again, not all the answers were perfect, but he was still able to see, that the differences could be explained, and they also knew everything about each other. The other thing that they asked, which I thought was really interesting, was what kind of floor they had in the bedroom. So was it carpeting? Was it wood? Was it, and it was just, it was interesting to see.
Yeah. I've had them ask questions like all the ones you've described. I've also had them ask things like, did you have a Christmas tree this last year? Who did you celebrate the holidays with? Who did you have Thanksgiving with? And also, like you, my clients often have given different answers because some of these questions are not necessarily, it's so interesting. They can be complete, one of the questions my clients have gotten wrong is like, did your husband take a shower this morning? You would think that would be a yes or no question. But, when it's like the wife said, yes, he did, and then he said no, he was like, well, I usually do shower in the mornings, but this morning, I was worried that I was going to be late. So I did, and she thought that he had, and because he always does. And so as long as you can provide a reasonable explanation, it's okay. But in my experience, those interviews, especially, when the couple is being separated in that way, it's very intimidating. It's very nerve-wracking for the individuals being questioned, in my experience. It can be. And so, again, it's just important for people to realize that they have to listen carefully. First and foremost, listen more than you talk. Make sure you understand the questions before you respond to them. And then just maintain your cool. As long as the officer is behaving professionally, you can continue with the interview. If they start freaking out and accusing you of lying, then you may need to request a supervisor. I've had to do that in a Stokes interview before. That's what the separated interview is called, a Stokes interview. And that's one of the only times I've had to, call timeout on an interview and ask the USCIS supervisor to come and join us. So, Diego, what do you think about, in a situation where people have been separated like that and it goes badly, in your experience, what should people do immediately after that, after the interview is over?
Well, depending on the situation, obviously, if you've got your attorney, hopefully that can be fixed, as soon as possible. If you don't have an attorney, well, you definitely need to go and speak to someone to try to, remedy the situation. Now, I've got a client that has a case where this is before they hired us. They were accused of not providing sufficient evidence to prove good faith marriage. Now, they weren't accused of being in a marriage just for immigration purposes, just not enough. And I think one of the very interesting aspects of that case, which was ignored by the officer and by the supervisor, was the fact that the U.S. citizen husband provided an affidavit explaining his addiction to painkillers, and he was going through withdrawal at the time of the interview. So that can explain his jitteriness. It can explain why he misspelled his wife's name, and there were things that I think in that case were done properly when the Immigration Service issued their notice of intent to deny. I think that they correctly responded for the most part to that notice, and provided, I think, evidence that would make me believe, well, that's understandable, that these different things could have these different answers, or the composure of the client, or her husband, I think if you act quickly, thoroughly, and you provide sufficient evidence, I think you can overcome that. And I've had situations where when we got the notice of intent to deny, we actually were able to overcome it. This is one of those only cases where I've seen it. And again, we didn't represent that case that came after, where I've seen it where they didn't, where I believe the marriage was legitimate.
Yeah.
But
so typically USCIS will give people like one additional chance to prove up the validity of the marriage. In my experience, right? You're talking about the notice of intent to deny. Usually they don't, right after an interview that goes badly, necessarily just automatically send a denial notice. They'll send a notice of intent to deny and give you 30 days to convince them why you shouldn't be denied. So so people typically, that's what Diego's referring to there. So you will typically have another chance to prove it up.
Right. So hopefully you get that chance. Now, there was I think they're going to reverse, if they haven't already, the policy where if they felt that you wouldn't be able to overcome, the missing evidence or prove the validity of the relationship, that they could deny it even without the notice of intent to deny. But
sure,
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I haven't either. I mean, they I think have always had discretion to potentially do that, but in my experience, they usually do give you an opportunity to make that last effort. I also want to point out that, if you do attend an interview without an attorney present and it goes badly, it's really important, I think, either during the interview itself or immediately thereafter, to make notes and try to write down as much as you can remember about exactly what the officer said, exactly what questions were asked, and what responses were provided, and what kinds of conversations happened. If you are working on your own without an attorney, and you have that kind of record, that's going to help your attorney so much to be able to really understand the context of what may have happened or what may have gone wrong, and be able to better support you. So definitely make notes if you can. Anything else, Diego? What else should people know about going to an interview with their spouse?
Well, I think it's when the interview goes bad, I think it's also good. You might be in such shock that you may forget to do it, but remember who interviewed you. Remember the officer's name.
Yes.
Because often you may not get their name, and when you get their notice of denial or their notice of intent to deny, it's under the district, the field office director's name, and so you won't remember. And we will sometimes know maybe which officers behave which ways, but
that's right.
It's good to know who that might have been, especially if there have been previous complaints about that individual.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, Diego, that certain officers definitely have a reputation. They develop a reputation for themselves, around the way that they interview and the way that they adjudicate cases. So if, you're unlucky and you get an officer who is, not necessarily interested in always being fair or being understanding or forgiving about any kind of mishap that may occur in your interview, it is so helpful for your attorney to know who that is, because typically, you know, we may have a strategy already developed for, you know, dealing with those kinds of officers.
You know, one other recommendation that I would have, and I always say, if you have any kind of criminal history, you should not be going to that interview alone.
Correct.
Now, let's say that you happen to have a criminal history and you're going on your own. You have to understand your criminal history. Just be, you know, if you were arrested, charged, and even if it was dismissed, the answer to have you ever been arrested is still yes. And I think a lot of clients don't understand that.
Yeah.
And when there is some sort of discrepancy in the record with your answers on that, that might taint the officer's opinion about your truthfulness about other things, including your marriage.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's why it's good to understand the issues in your case and the criminal history and all the other things that might pop up, because how you answer and how they view the truthfulness of your answers will also, I think, affect the way that they see your marriage.
For sure. Well, if, you know, we are able to help you at Walker Gates Vela with an I-130 interview, an I-130 petition interview for a spouse or an adjustment of status. We would be happy to do that. Please reach out to us at our website, walkergatesvela.com. You can go there to click to call us or to schedule an appointment. Also, feel free to leave comments below this video. Subscribe to our channel. We are providing updates regularly about changes in immigration law. The USCIS has just updated the forms required for adjustment of status, as well as the affidavit of support. So that's something that we'll be going over soon. But you know, the laws and the policies and the forms and everything are changing a lot in this day and age. So it is really helpful to be subscribed so that you can make sure and get regular trustworthy updates. So with that, thank you so much, Diego, for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. And we will look forward to seeing you soon.